Mankaa the ghost was sitting in her grave impatiently waiting for night to come so that she could go back to the dormitory and teach that stupid lying girl Lum a lesson. Her anger could not be contained, and that night she had something special planned for Lum. She was going to teach Lum a lesson. Mankaa the ghost was busy thinking these thoughts and making plans for the night when suddenly something unexpected happened. A familiar scent reached her nose, and she stood up immediately and sniffed the air, trying to identify the scent. It was her daughter's scent. Mankaa frowned. Why was she suddenly able to smell her daughter when she had not been able to do so in years? Where was the scent coming from? Had they found her daughter? She started to follow the scent, her dead heart beating fast with hope. Her daughter was close, she could feel it. She ran and ran in the direction of the smell, and to her confusion, it led her to the dormitory. Mankaa the ghost found herself standing in front of that stupid lying girl Lum's bed. Her daughter's smell was stronger here. Mankaa looked around expectantly, hoping to see her daughter, but she was not there. She turned to Lum full of questions, but she stopped when she saw what Lum was holding in her hands, the source of her daughter's scent. Mankaa moved with a ghostly speed and snatched her daughter's school bag and shoe from Lum. Her hands were shaking as she looked at the things. She remembered the excitement on Sirri's face when she bought this bag, and the shoes too. Mankaa pressed the items to her face and took in her daughter's scent. It was like hugging Sirri again, a joy she never thought she would feel again. But wait though, why did Lum have her daughter's things? Mankaa turned to Lum and demanded to know what was going on, and to her disappointment, once again, Lum said that she did not know where Sirri was and told Mankaa about the tree. A tree? Mankaa was confused. She asked Lum to take her to this tree immediately. She hoped Lum had missed something about the tree that her more mature eyes would easily catch. Lum did not argue. She stood up immediately and led Mankaa out of the dormitory. It was completely dark outside as they crossed the campus and entered the scary forest behind the school. The only thing lighting their path was the torch in Lum's hand, and Lum was shivering so much from fear that the torch in her hand almost fell down. She hated going into that forest, and to go there at night again, it was just unbearable for her. She almost turned back and ran to the dormitory, but she was afraid of making the ghost even more angry at her. She had been through hell the last couple of days because of the ghost's anger, and she just wanted the torture to end. So she swallowed her fear and focused her eyes on the torchlight and kept walking forward with the ghost behind her. Like Lum had expected, there was nothing there when they finally made it to the tree. No trace of Sirri like Mankaa had hoped. Not even a lingering scent to show that Sirri was previously there. Mankaa asked Lum to show her exactly where Lum found Sirri's things, when exactly she found them, and what led Lum to finding them. Lum told her, and none of it made any sense to Mankaa. So she went around the tree many times, meticulously checking every detail and desperately calling out to her daughter, hoping that Sirri would somehow hear her. There had to be an explanation, Mankaa thought to herself. Someone left her daughter's things here. But who? Or maybe Lum was lying to her. Maybe Lum knew where her daughter was and Lum was lying to her again. She did not trust Lum anymore. Lum stood idly under the tree and watched the ghost go round and round the tree, and she could feel the ghost's frustration growing with every second. Lum gathered her courage and approached the ghost. She knew she needed to do something now that the ghost was still talking to her. She stopped in front of the ghost and said that they needed to talk. And surprisingly, the ghost stopped and listened to her. Lum did not waste a second. She told the ghost that she was really sorry for failing her promise last time, and that if the ghost gave her one more chance, she could figure out what happened to Sirri. She told the ghost, however, that this time she did not know when she would find Sirri or if she was going to find Sirri, but she was willing to keep trying. Hopefully, finding Sirri's school bag and shoe meant she was getting closer. Manka, the ghost, was torn between forgiving Lum and holding on to her grudge. She was still mad at Lum, but Lum had this innocent face filled with kindness that always reminded Manka of her daughter. And to be honest, Manka's anger at Lum had reduced. Lum had given her something of her daughter's to hold on to. She now had her daughter's scent in her hands when previously she had nothing, and Lum was to thank for that. She wished she could see her daughter in person, but finding her daughter's things was hope. She had hope now. She agreed to give Lum more time, as much time as Lum needed, which brought a big happy smile to the girl's face. Manka walked away after that, holding tightly to her daughter's things. She did not haunt the dormitory that night, and the night after. And Lum was not sure if the ghost's absence was temporary or permanent. She hoped it was permanent, but doubted it. She had wanted to bring up the topic with the ghost, but feared she would be asking for too much too soon. One thing Lum knew for sure though, was that she had to find out where that bag and shoe came from. Who left it there? Why they left it there? Was Sirri still alive? What was up with the Reverend sisters and that tree? The next day, Lum was sitting in the school library, attempting and failing to focus on her notes. There was a test coming up, and she was so distracted that she could not cram anything. The library, being as quiet as it was, made her thoughts even more louder. Just as she was about to pack her books and return to the dormitory, someone sat down next to her, making Lum jump back in fear. But when Lum looked up, it was Senior Sinchan. Lum rolled her eyes in her mind on seeing the senior. What did she want this time? After ignoring Lum for days, acting like she did not know Lum and refusing to help. Lum impatiently asked the senior what the senior wanted. Words could not describe her frustration at the senior. But the reason Senior Sinchan was there that day was to warn Lum. She told Lum in a whisper so that other students in the library could not overhear them, that tomorrow was November 30th, the day a girl was expected to go missing at the school. That caught Lum's attention, and she turned to the senior with wide eyes. Lum had completely forgotten about November 30th with all the ghost drama, the missing girl drama, the suspicious Reverend sister drama, and the her father still not back from his trip drama that was going on in her life. Senior Sinchan continued to say that if Lum wanted to see for herself what usually happens on November 30th at the school, that she should make sure to be in the forest behind the school at exactly 9 p.m. tomorrow. Something was going to happen in the forest tomorrow. She stood up after saying that and walked out of the library. Lum thought about the senior's words non-stop as she went about the rest of her day. She was both scared and eager for the next day to come. Was what the senior said about November 30th true? Who will be taken this year? Which girl were they planning to make disappear? She had goosebumps just thinking about it. The next day, Lum convinced her two friends to follow her into the forest behind the school, which was not easy to do because her friends were trying to stay out of anything supernatural, especially after the hellish last few days, suffering nightly torments from the ghost. But in the end, Lum convinced them, and at exactly 9 p.m. that night, the three of them quietly left the dormitory and walked across the campus to the forest. Lum's heart was pounding with both fear and anticipation, and her friends were all hiding behind her as they walked, jumping at every sound and movement in the darkness. Lum was not sure if she was imagining it or not, but as they entered the forest that night, she noticed something different about the forest. The 3 times she had been there before, The place was just scary, dark and quiet. But tonight, in addition to being scary, dark and quiet, the forest felt like it was alive. It was hard to explain the feeling, but it felt almost as if the forest was breathing in and out, as if the darkness was moving, as if the trees had eyes that were watching them as they entered, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen too. It was a strange feeling, and Lum could not really explain it with words, but she felt it. She tried not to think too much about it. Just as they entered the forest, they saw 3 people walking ahead of them. And like Lum and her friends, it seemed the 3 people ahead had also just arrived. Lum cautioned her friends immediately to hide, and they followed the 3 people quietly. Lum could not tell who they were as she could only see them from the back, but she could tell that they were all women. And it seemed 2 of them were forcing the 3rd woman to follow them. This 3rd woman looked smaller compared to her companions, and the other women were holding both her arms as they tried to get her to move. This 3rd person was stumbling as she walked, as if there was something wrong with her. And Lum was also not sure if her eyes were deceiving her or not, but she swore one of the women walked just like Sister Grace. As they followed the 3 people, one of Lum's friends suddenly stopped walking and said that she wanted to go back to the dormitory. She said that she did not feel good about being there or about following the 3 strangers. She had a very bad feeling in her stomach. Lum turned to her friend and told her friend firmly to stop complaining and acting like a baby. And her friend stopped complaining and reluctantly followed Lum. Just like Lum had suspected, the 3 people ahead of them walked to the big old tree and stopped there. And then something very strange happened. The strangest thing Lum had ever seen in her life. Even though, come to think of it, she had seen many strange things in recent weeks. What happened was, one of the women, the one holding the torch, walked right up to the tree, extended her hand and knocked at the tree 3 times. What followed the knock was even more shocking. Lum and her friends watched with their mouths wide open as the tree, after being knocked on, opened like a door, and the 3 women walked into the tree. Before they walked into the tree, one of the women turned around to check if anyone was following them, revealing her face. It was Sister Grace. One of Lum's friends, on seeing Sister Grace's face, almost screamed, but Lum quickly slapped her hand around her friend's mouth, stopping the sound from coming out. And then they remained very still and quiet and watched as the 3 women vanished into the tree. As soon as the 3 women were out of sight, Lum told her friends that she was going after the women. Her friends asked her if she had lost her mind and begged her not to go. But Lum had made up her mind. She asked her friends to return to the dormitory and then ran towards the tree, hoping that the door would still be open. But when she got there, it was not. The tree was back to being a normal tree. Lum thought for a moment and then raised her hand and knocked 3 times at the door like she had seen the others knock. And to her surprise, the door opened again. Lum walked through hesitantly. She was scared out of her mind, and a huge part of her knew she should not be doing what she was doing. But a gut feeling told her that the answers she was looking for were inside that tree. Guys, before I continue, there's something I feel like I need to tell you. Recently, I found a few channels here on YouTube copying this story, the poster and the title. A certain channel, which I will not glorify with a name, has even downloaded my video and uploaded it to their channel with a few changes made and without my permission. And they are using a poster very similar to my poster. I'm thinking that these channels, which again I will not name, want to deceive you, my beautiful storytelling family, into thinking that their videos are a continuation of this story or whatever, I don't know. Anyways, I just wanted to let you know that it is not. Please, before you click on any video with a poster where Reverend sisters are holding their fingers to their lips with scared schoolgirls dressed in red running in the middle, please check to see if it's from my channel. My channel name is Chufi's Tales. Also, how you can tell if the video is original or not is to listen to my voice in the video. You will know my voice by now if you've been following this story. Thank you all so much for your patience, and I'm so sorry for interrupting. Please let us go back to the story. As Lum walked into the tree, the entrance was dark and as cold as ice, making her shiver strongly. But as soon as she walked through the door, she found herself standing in a big, lively beer parlor with loud music, flashing lights everywhere, and many people. Sister Grace and her two companions were nowhere to be found. All around Lum, men were laughing and drinking beer, and beautiful light-skinned girls dressed in indecent pink clothes were dancing provocatively on the tables before the men. Lum stared at the scene with her eyes wide open, as she had never been to such an immoral place in her life. If her mother found out that Lum set foot in such a place, Lum would be finished, even her father. But that was beside the point. How did she walk into a tree and end up in a beer parlor? Lum expected someone, an elder, to walk up to her and tell her to leave, or worse, harm her for being there. But no one in the bar even seemed to be paying her attention, or if they did not seem to care. Lum went further into the beer parlor, passing tables crowded with drunk, laughing men who were throwing money at the girls dancing on the table. She went past 5 tables and was about to walk past a 5th table when she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. There, in one of the corridors to the right, Lum saw Sister Grace and Sister Agatha talking to a big hairy man dressed in funny leather clothes and a police hat. Lum hid in a corner and watched them. The Reverend sisters were negotiating with this man from the look of things, still holding that girl they forcefully brought to the tree. After talking for what seemed like forever, they handed the girl over to the big hairy man, and it was then that Lum saw who the girl was. She recognized the girls as one of the seniors from her school, and the senior was light-skinned and looked like she could be 16 years old, just like Senior Sinchang had told Lum. This senior was dressed in a blue nightgown and her hair was messy, and she looked confused, like she was not fully awake, or like she did not even know where she was or what was happening. She did not resist when the big hairy man grabbed her by the arm and took her away. Sister Grace and Sister Agatha went the other way and disappeared around a corner. As they walked away, Lum turned back to the beer parlor, and by mistake she bumped into a man standing behind her. She quickly apologized to the man, but he gave her a nasty look and blew the smoke of his cigarette in her face. The smell was so strong that Lum started coughing uncontrollably, tears running down her face. She coughed so much that she thought she would die. But then someone touched her back and offered Lum a glass of water, which Lum drank greedily. When her chest was feeling a little bit better, she turned around to thank the person who gave her water and was shocked by who she saw standing in front of her. It was one of the beautiful girls serving beer at the bar. She was dressed in a pink skirt and blouse, and she looked exactly like Sirri, the ghost's missing daughter. Lum looked closely at the girl. Could it be? She did not know Sirri personally, but she had committed Sirri's physical appearance to her memory from the photo she saw in the library that day. The girl in front of her looked older than in the photo, but Lum swore it was Sirri. To make sure, Lum said Sirri's name, and that was all the confirmation she needed because Sirri's eyes went wide in shock. She asked Lum how Lum knew her name, and Lum told her that she was a student at St. Martha's. Lum was so excited she could not believe she was finally talking to Sirri. After searching for so long, Lum excitedly told Sirri that her mother was looking for her, certain that this was something Sirri wanted to hear. But Sirri's eyes immediately filled with tears at the mention of her mother's name. She seemed so sad all of a sudden, and she eagerly asked Lum how Lum knew her mother and how her mother was doing. Her eyes were shining with tears as she asked about her mother. She must miss her mother so much, Lum thought. Lum lied to Sirri that her mother was doing okay. It did not feel like the right time to tell Sirri that her mother was dead or all the other stuff that had happened. She told Sirri that her mother was back at the school campus waiting for her and asked Sirri to follow her back to the school campus so that the two of them could see her mother together. But Sirri did not react with excitement to this information like Lum expected. Immediately, Lum suggested that they go back to the school campus. She saw fear enter Sirri's eyes. Sirri took a step back from Lum as if she was suddenly afraid to be seen with Lum and told Lum that she could not go with Lum. And when Lum asked why, saying that her mother was waiting for her, that they needed to hurry, Sirri told her that no one was allowed to leave the beer parlor. That made no sense to Lum, and she asked Sirri what Sirri meant by no one was allowed to leave the beer parlor. And Sirri reluctantly replied that they were all trapped there. She pointed at the other bar servers and the girls dancing on the tables and said that they were all trapped in the tree, trapped in the beer parlor, including herself, and that no one was allowed to leave. Something occurred to Lum in that moment as she listened to what Sirri was saying. She had not realized it before, but looking at the girls dancing on the table now and the other girls serving drinks in the bar, Lum began to recognize some of them. She had not been paying attention before, but Lum recognized them from the album she saw in the school library that day. They were all older now, but she could tell it was them. Not all the missing girls were there, and some of them Lum did not recognize at all, but quite a number of the faces were familiar to her. Lum felt a strange feeling on realizing this. Something very serious, very sinister was going on here, and it gave her goosebumps. She asked Sirri what this place was, and Sirri said that she did not know. All she knew was that she would spend the rest of her life there, and that she could not leave, which made Lum all the more frightened. What was this place? Lum had so many questions for Sirri, but it felt like they were wasting time standing there and talking. It was almost 11:30 p.m. and something was telling Lum that time was running out. There was a voice inside her head that had started whispering to her the moment she walked through the door in the tree, and the voice was telling her to leave the beer parlor before midnight, no matter what. Lum could not explain how she was hearing this voice, but it was getting louder and louder with every second she spent there, telling her to hurry up before it was too late. Lum thought about leaving. It was probably wise to listen to the voice in her head, but she knew she could not live without Sirri. She did not come all this way for nothing. She had 30 minutes left, and she was going to use the time to convince Sirri to come with her. Out of desperation, she grabbed Sirri's hand and tried to drag Sirri to the door, but Sirri refused to move. Sirri was terrified by the idea of leaving the beer parlor, and it showed. And she said that if she left, Papa would find her, bring her back, and then punish her for daring to leave. It was obvious that Sirri wanted to leave from what Lum could see, but the thought of this Papa person finding her was so terrifying that she dared not even try. Just as Lum was about to ask who Papa was, that big hairy guy with the funny leather clothes and the police hat Lum had seen talking to Sister Grace and Sister Agatha in the corridor earlier appeared behind Sirri and sternly asked Sirri why she was chatting and not working. Sirri was visibly terrified of the man, the way she shook in his presence, and she apologized to him many times and then hurried back to work. The big hairy man gave Lum a nasty look and left without saying a word. Lum stood there and watched Sirri return to work with a sick feeling in her stomach. Sirri should not be here. None of the girls deserved to be here. Lum turned around and started to leave because midnight was drawing closer. But she found that she could not leave. She simply could not leave Sirri behind. Who knew if she would ever get a chance to enter the tree again? She had to find a way to convince Sirri to come with her. Lum walked to the center of the beer parlor where the girls were dancing, intending to talk to one of the girls. From afar, it seemed like everyone in the bar was having fun. But if you looked closely, you could see the tension on the girls' shoulders as they danced and served the men drinks. Their faces were sad, their movements were reluctant, and they gave Sirri these secret looks as if they were crying out for help. Lum was so lost in feeling sorry for these girls that she did not realize the time. She only realized that it was midnight when she heard the big clock on the wall strike midnight. She looked up in fear and then tried to run to the door, but it was too late. Immediately the clock struck midnight. Strange things started to happen in the beer parlor. The music grew louder, almost to a point where Lum's ears felt like they would explode. The men in the room laughed harder, drank more, and the girls on the table moved at a quicker rhythm. Everything was suddenly intensified, moving at a fast pace that was not human. Lum tried to go to the door, but the dance floor was suddenly crowded with people who were not there before, dancing fast and making it impossible for her to go anywhere. She was trapped between dancing bodies on the dance floor. When Lum looked across the room, desperately looking for a way out, her soul almost jumped out of her body because of what she saw. There, in a corner of the room, Lum saw that man who blew cigarette smoke in her face, standing alone. But unlike before, the man now had goat legs. From the waist up, he was human, but from the waist down, he was a goat. Lum took a step back in fear, and then another step back, and another step back, because she started to realize, looking down, that everyone in the bar had goat legs. Everyone except the missing girls. Lum screamed in fear, but her voice did not come out. Her voice was trapped inside her head. Her mouth was moving, but nothing was coming out. She started to push at the people around her, desperately trying to get to the door. She needed to get out of there. She wished she had listened to the voice in her head telling her to leave earlier. She pushed and pushed and pushed in vain. Someone bumped into Lum after a moment, and she stumbled and fell. And immediately as she fell on the ground, a bizarre thing started to happen around her. The beer parlor suddenly went quiet as a graveyard. All the goat-legged people in the bar stopped dancing and turned to Lum. Lum watched in horror as they approached her, their faces blank. Their goat legs were very visible now, and it made Lum want to vomit in fear. They surrounded her and stood above her and watched without saying a word. They just watched her. Their faces were blank at first, but then they started to smile down at her. And it was these weird, wicked smiles that reached all the way up to their hairlines. Sister Grace and Sister Agatha were among the faces. They said nothing. They did nothing. They just stood there and they watched Lum. Lum tried to get up and run, to crawl out of there if possible. But it was as if her body was no longer working. Her mind was working, and it gave her hands and feet instructions, but nothing was happening. She suddenly started to feel sleepy. It was as if the evil smiling faces of the goat people above her were making her sleepy. She tried to stay awake. She fought to stay awake. But no, the hands of sleep reached up from somewhere underground and they dragged her down into sleep. Just before Lum closed her eyes and surrendered to sleep, she saw Sirri standing in a corner, crying. And what scared Lum was that Sirri did not seem to be crying for herself. She was crying for Lum. That's it for part 3, guys. This was such a fun part to create, and I can't wait to see where the story goes in the next part. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. And please stay tuned for part 4.